They called her many things: a barbarian princess, a Roman hostage, a usurper, a savior. But for a brief, fragile moment in the 5th century, she was something almost impossible for her time. A woman ruling at the crossroads of 3 worlds: the Goths, the Western Roman Empire, and the Eastern Roman Empire. Her name was Galla Placidia, and today she's almost forgotten. Yet she once commanded armies, influenced emperors, and held the balance of power between collapsing Rome and rising barbarian kingdoms. This is her story: the forgotten queen who ruled over 3 kingdoms. We begin in a city already living on borrowed time: Rome. The year 394 CE. The air is thick with incense and sweat as troops march through the streets. The Emperor Theodosius I has just crushed a massive rebellion at the Battle of the Visigoths. He is now, for a brief moment, the last man to rule a united Roman Empire, East and West together. Among the imperial entourage, in the shadow of taller, armor-clad figures, walks a child, a girl. She's perhaps 4 or 5 years old. Her dark hair is braided, her clothing fine, but not ostentatious. No one in the crowd realizes they're looking at someone who will reshape the fate of Rome itself. Her name is Galla Placidia, daughter of Theodosius. She is born into the most powerful family in the world, and into an empire that is quietly tearing itself apart. To understand her story, we need to understand the world she inherited. By the late 4th century, the Roman Empire is no longer the unstoppable juggernaut of Caesar and Augustus. It is massive, stretched, and under pressure. External tribes, Goths, Vandals, Huns, are at the borders, sometimes raiding, sometimes negotiating, sometimes serving as mercenaries. Inside, Roman politics has become a deadly game of factions, religion, and ambition. The army is increasingly made up of barbarian soldiers, federate troops, hired and settled within the empire. The tax system strains. Old pagan traditions are fading. Christianity is rising and dividing people into competing doctrines. Theodosius, Galla's father, tries to hold all of this together. He defeats rival emperors, ensures his line will rule. He has 2 sons, Arcadius in the east, Honorius in the west, and a daughter, Galla Placidia. But Theodosius will die when Galla is still a child. And with his death, the Roman world fractures into 2 courts: Constantinople in the east, Ravenna in the west. Galla will pass between them like a piece on a chessboard, until she decides to move herself. As a child, Galla Placidia is taken into the household of the imperial court. She's technically a princess, an Augusta in waiting, but without her mother or father. She's raised inside the walls of power, yet largely as a political asset. She sees more than children are supposed to see. She sees how generals stand taller when the emperor looks away, how courtiers smile with their mouths while their eyes stay cold, how bishops speak softly, but their words move armies. Around her, the empire's fate is being negotiated, but no one imagines that one day she'll be the negotiator. The empire splits, not officially divided forever, but in practice, the eastern and western halves become almost separate states. Her older brother Arcadius rules in Constantinople. Her younger brother Honorius becomes emperor in the west at just 10 years old, with a powerful general named Stilicho as his guardian. Galla, still a teenager, is in the western court, effectively part of Stilicho's household in Italy. Stilicho is half Vandal, half Roman, a bridge between Roman elites and the barbarian federates. He sees Galla as a valuable marriage piece, possibly to cement alliances. She likely learns Latin and Greek, theology, etiquette, maybe even some statecraft. But she's not expected to rule. That's not what imperial daughters are for. Yet, every time a messenger arrives from the east, or new rumors swirl about barbarian movements in the Balkans, Galla is watching, listening. She is growing up in an empire quietly preparing to break. Her world changes violently in the year 408. Stilicho, the great general who effectively runs the Western Empire, is accused of treason. A storm of court intrigue and suspicion explodes. He is arrested and executed. And just like that, the man holding the Western Empire's military together is gone. His Germanic troops, many of whom are personally loyal to him, feel betrayed. They desert. Some even defect to the enemy. The enemy's name is Alaric. Alaric is a leader of the Visigoths, a people who had entered the empire decades earlier as refugees and federates, but have been repeatedly used, abused, and betrayed by Roman politics. He is tired of waiting for fair treatment. He is tired of promises without payment. Now, with Stilicho dead and the Western army in disarray, Alaric sees an opportunity. He marches his forces into Italy. Within months, the Visigoths are camped outside Rome itself. This is not how the story was supposed to go. The Romans still think of themselves as the masters of the world. The city of Rome hasn't been taken by a foreign enemy in nearly 800 years. Inside the city, panic, food shortages, political infighting, superstition. And somewhere within those walls is Galla Placidia. We don't know exactly what Galla thought as Alaric's army surrounded Rome, but we can imagine the tension. Was she terrified? Or did she recognize in Alaric's determination something familiar? Another outsider trying to force the empire to listen. Alaric doesn't want to destroy Rome. Not at first. He wants leverage. He wants a settlement, land for his people, recognition from the Emperor Honorius. He negotiates. He offers terms. But Honorius is not in Rome. He is in Ravenna, a safer, swamp-protected city on the Adriatic coast, and he refuses to meet Alaric's demands. Ministers around him think they can outlast the Goths, or that another general will save them. No one does. In 410, after a long siege and failed agreements, Alaric's patience runs out. On a warm August night, the unimaginable happens. Gothic soldiers breach the Salarian Gate. Rome, the eternal city, once mistress of the world, is sacked. Picture the scene. Flames licking at the night sky. Statues toppled. Gold stripped from temples. Panic in the streets. Families fleeing. Crowds surging toward what they hope will be safety. And in the middle of this slow-motion catastrophe, Roman and Gothic worlds collide. Gothic leaders give orders not to destroy churches, especially the great basilicas of Saints Peter and Paul. Many Romans, including aristocrats, flee into those sacred spaces, hoping Christian sanctity will protect them. In the chaos, Galla Placidia is seized. The Princess of Rome becomes a hostage of the Visigoths. For most Roman aristocrats, this would be the ultimate humiliation. But for Galla, this is the moment her life's axis shifts. Because in captivity, she doesn't disappear. She becomes important. Alaric dies only a few months after the sack, suddenly, unexpectedly. His people bury him in a riverbed, diverting water to dig the grave, then letting it wash back over his resting place, hiding it forever. A king without a visible tomb, leadership passes to his brother-in-law, Athalf. Athalf is not just a warlord, he's a man thinking about the future. He knows his people cannot simply keep roaming Italy forever. They need land, legitimacy, stability. And he has a very valuable, very royal Roman hostage, Galla Placidia. The sources tell us that Athalf fell in love with her. How much of that is romantic embellishment and how much is politics is hard to say. But we know this. He decides to marry her. Think about what that means. A Roman imperial princess, daughter of the last emperor who ruled East and West, sister of the current Western emperor, married to the king of the Visigoths. For conservative Romans, this is an outrage. For some Goths, it's an opportunity. The wedding takes place in 414 in Narbonne, in southern Gaul, after the Visigoths have moved out of Italy. Imagine the scene: a Roman princess in a foreign court, surrounded by Gothic nobles, some wearing Roman-style tunics, others still in furs and cloaks. Bishops preside. It is a Christian ceremony. Gifts are exchanged. One of the gifts, according to one chronicler, is a display of the spoils of Rome itself. A strange symbolic gesture. The treasures of the empire turned into wedding presents. For the first time, Galla Placidia is not just a pawn moved by others. As Atholf's queen, she is at the heart of a new political project. Atholf publicly declares that his dream had once been to destroy the Roman Empire and replace it with a Gothic one. But after seeing the chaos and weakness in Italy, he says he has changed his mind. Now, he claims he wants to preserve the Roman Empire, but with the Goths as its protectors. And his marriage to Galla Placidia is the proof, a union of Roman and Gothic worlds. In that sense, she becomes queen over a kingdom caught between three spheres, the Gothic people she now lives among. The Western Roman Empire ruled by her brother Honorius, and the Eastern Roman Empire watching nervously from Constantinople. Three realms. One woman at their intersection. From this union, a child is born, a boy named Theodosius, named significantly after Galla's father. This child could have been the embodiment of Atholf's dream. A Roman Gothic prince, linking imperial blood with barbarian military power. If he had grown up, what might he have become? A Gothic emperor of Rome, a Roman emperor backed by Gothic armies, the founder of a hybrid kingdom spanning Gaul and Spain? We'll never know, because tragedy hits quickly and mercilessly. The baby dies in infancy. We don't know how or why. Disease, likely. The same fragility that haunted all ancient families, even imperial ones, with his death. Something more dies, the most immediate living symbol of peace between Rome and the Goths. Atholf himself is assassinated not long after, in 415, in a palace, stabbing by a former servant of Alaric, apparently seeking revenge for some old grievance. In a matter of months, Galla loses her son and her husband. From Roman princess to Gothic queen, and now to widowed captive again, the dream that she and Atholf might bridge two worlds collapses. But Galla Placidia is not finished. After Atholf's death, chaos rocks the Gothic kingdom. The new king, Sigeric, reportedly treats Galla harshly. One source claims he made her walk on foot 4 miles among a procession of other captives, public humiliation for the imperial woman. Yet Sigeric's reign lasts only days. He is murdered. Another Gothic leader, Wallia, takes power, and he is more practical. Wallia needs food and security for his people. The Western Roman court, despite its weakness, still controls official titles and recognition. So Wallia negotiates with Honorius. The terms are clear. The Goths will return Galla Placidia and fight as federates for Rome. In exchange, they will be given land, not in Italy this time, but in southwestern Gaul and eventually in Hispania, laying the groundwork for what will become the long-lasting Visigothic kingdom. Rome gets its princess back. The Goths get a homeland. Galla, once a hostage and queen among the Goths, now returns to the Roman world. But she is not the same young woman who left. She returns with experience of another court, another culture, another way of wielding power. She has seen the empire from the outside. She knows that Rome is not untouchable and that knowledge will shape what she does next. Back in Ravenna, Honorius receives her. At least officially, she is his beloved sister. In reality, he and his regime likely see her as both asset and potential threat. She is valuable as a symbol, the pious, noble Augusta, a living link to Theodosius. But she also has connections, prestige, and now the aura of someone whom barbarians were willing to marry, not just kidnap to tie her more tightly to Western Roman interests. The court quickly arranges another marriage. This time, her groom is no barbarian king, but a Roman general. Constantius is everything Atholf was not. Short, reportedly blunt and coarse, but terrifying on the battlefield. He is one of the few remaining capable commanders in the West. He has already played a key role in pushing the Goths out of Italy. He is, in many ways, the last great soldier the Western Empire will have. Marrying Galla to Constantius is a political move, a way of binding the imperial family to the man who actually commands the army. It works for a time. Galla and Constantius have 2 children, a daughter, Justa Grata Honoria, and a son, Valentinian. If those names sound imperial, they are. Valentinian will one day sit on the throne as Western Roman Emperor. Through her children, Galla's bloodline will continue to rule in the West, and her decisions as a mother and regent will shape what remains of the empire. By 421, Constantius has become so powerful that Honorius raises him to co-emperor, a colleague, a fellow Augustus. It's a classic Roman solution. When someone becomes too powerful, you institutionalize their power instead of fighting it. Galla is now wife of an emperor as well as sister of an emperor. She receives the title Augusta, Empress, in the West. For a moment, it looks like the Western Empire has found a workable arrangement. Honorius the passive emperor, Constantius the active ruler, and Galla the link between imperial blood and military might. But once again, the gods, or fate, are cruel. Constantius dies the same year he becomes emperor. Just as she begins to taste real imperial power in her own right, Galla is widowed again, and the court of Ravenna turns on her. With Constantius gone, Galla's position becomes precarious. Honorius, perhaps manipulated by courtiers, becomes suspicious of her influence. We're told that relations between brother and sister deteriorate sharply. We don't have all the details, but we know the outcome. In 423, Galla Placidia and her 2 children are forced to flee Ravenna. Officially, she is sent away to Constantinople, but exile is exile even when it comes with a royal escort. Now, in her mid-30s, Galla finds herself tossed back across the Mediterranean, this time to the Eastern Court, to the city where her father had once ruled. In Constantinople, she is under the watch of her nephew, Theodosius II, the Eastern Emperor. Once again, Galla is in the role that defined so much of her life, a pawn between worlds. In the West, Honorius rules alone, increasingly isolated and ineffective. In the East, Theodosius II watches the Western collapse from afar, wary of getting too involved but unable to ignore it entirely. And Galla stands between them, sister to one emperor, aunt to another, mother to a boy who could be emperor himself. But then, an opportunity presents itself. Honorius dies in 423 suddenly. Without a legitimate heir, the Western throne is empty. And that's when everything changes. The power vacuum in the West is immediately filled by a usurper, a man named Joannes, a senior civil official, proclaimed emperor by the bureaucracy in Ravenna. Joannes is capable, but he has one enormous problem. He is not from the Theodosian dynasty. If you want legitimacy in this world, you need one of 3 things: military victory, dynastic blood, or Eastern recognition. Joannes has none of them. Galla Placidia has 2. She is herself of Theodosian blood, and she stands in the court of Theodosius II, who controls the Eastern Empire's armies and prestige. If she can persuade Theodosius to back her son, Valentinian, as Western Emperor, Joannes is finished. So imagine the scene in Constantinople, Theodosius II, still young, listening to his Aunt Galla. She reminds him of her father, his grandfather, Theodosius I, who united the empire. She reminds him that the Western throne is theirs by right. Do they really want some bureaucrat in Ravenna wearing the purple? With her encouragement, and likely the encouragement of Eastern advisors who prefer a weak child emperor they can influence over an independent strongman, Theodosius II takes action. He proclaims Galla's little boy, Valentinian, Caesar in the West. Then he raises him to Augustus, emperor in name, but Valentinian is only about 4 or 5 years old, so who will actually rule? Everyone knows the answer. Galla Placidia. In 425, Eastern ships and armies sail west. Galla Placidia, Valentinian, and young Honoria are on board their mission. Reclaim the Western throne from Joannes. The campaign is swift. Eastern forces land in Italy. Joannes is captured. He is humiliated, his right hand cut off, paraded on a donkey, and then executed. The message is clear. The Western Empire belongs to the Theodosian dynasty, and right now, that means Galla's son. In the city of Rome, not Ravenna, Valentinian III is formally installed as Western Emperor. He is still a little boy. He barely understands the ceremony, the cheers, the weight of the diadem placed on his head. His mother understands it perfectly. From this moment until he comes of age, Galla Placidia is the real power in the Western Roman Empire. She is regent, an empress ruling, in all but name, over what remains of Rome. And because her position depends on Eastern recognition, she is also a bridge to Constantinople. She is, briefly and precariously, the political center of 3 worlds: the Western Roman court in Ravenna, the Eastern Roman court in Constantinople, and the federate barbarian kingdom she knows all too well. The forgotten queen has finally taken the throne. So what does Galla do with that power? We might imagine a dramatic, ruthless empress slashing down enemies and reshaping laws with a single decree. Reality is messier, more constrained. She is ruling a broken machine. The Western Roman Empire in 425 is not the Rome of old. Its armies are depleted, its finances strained, its provinces slipping away. Britain is gone. Parts of Gaul have fallen under Frankish and Gothic influence. Spain is contested. North Africa is under pressure from the Vandals. Galla cannot magically fix this, but she can play the game better than most. First, she restores some sense of dynastic legitimacy. The image of little Valentinian and his mother provides continuity with Theodosius I, reassuring conservative elites. The old line still rules. Second, she leans heavily on key generals, especially one man who will become her greatest ally and her future problem. His name is Flavius Aetius. Aetius is a fascinating figure, a Roman general who grew up partly as a hostage among the Huns, speaks their language, understands their warcraft, and later uses them as mercenaries. He is, like Stilicho and Constantius before him, the kind of soldier the empire increasingly depends on. Galla, from her regency in Ravenna, has to manage men like Aetius and another powerful general, Boniface in North Africa, who holds perhaps the most crucial territory of all, the North African grain provinces that feed Italy. Papering over their rivalries, balancing their ambitions, keeping them loyal. This is the daily grind of her rule. At the same time, she maintains a careful relationship with Constantinople, acknowledging Eastern precedents while asserting Western autonomy. She issues laws in the name of her son. She intervenes in religious disputes. She supports the church, builds up her reputation as a pious Augusta, and uses that moral authority to bolster her political decisions. This is not the kind of rule that makes for flashy battle scenes, but it is the kind that keeps a collapsing empire staggering forward for another generation. Yet even the most skilled regent cannot control everything. And soon, one of the most consequential disasters of late Roman history unfolds, with Galla right in the middle. The trouble starts, as it often does in late Rome, with rivalry and suspicion. Boniface, the Comes Count of Africa, controls the vital grain-rich provinces of North Africa, modern-day Tunisia and parts of Algeria. Aetius, ambitious and rising, sees him as a competitor. Some later sources suggest that Aetius, jealous of Boniface's power, convinces Galla Placidia that Boniface is plotting against her. At the same time, he allegedly convinces Boniface that Galla intends to recall and execute him. Whether this tale is entirely true or partly propaganda, the outcome is clear. Trust breaks down Galla, fearing Boniface's potential rebellion, orders him to come to Italy. Boniface, fearing a trap, refuses. He looks for allies, and he turns to a group that has recently arrived in North Africa, the Vandals. The Vandals are a Germanic people who had crossed the Rhine into Gaul, then into Spain, and now, under their king, Gothic, are looking for more permanent land and opportunity. Boniface, likely desperate, invites the Vandals to help him resist imperial pressure. It's a gamble. Use barbarians to shore up his position, then deal with them later. This gamble will end the Western Roman Empire's control over its breadbasket. The Vandals cross into Africa, supposedly as allies. But once they see the wealth and vulnerability of the region, they stay. They fight Boniface. They fight imperial forces sent against them. And they win. By the time everyone realizes what has happened, it is too late. Rome loses effective control of much of North Africa. Within a generation, the Vandals will take Carthage and establish their own kingdom, fatally wounding the Western Empire's economy. Galla, as regent, is at the center of these decisions, trusting the wrong men, misjudging the rivalries, underestimating the barbarian ambitions she once saw so clearly among the Goths. She is not omnipotent. She is not infallible. Her rule delays the fall of the West, but also, in some ways, sets the stage for it. As Valentinian grows older, Galla's formal regency fades. By the mid-400s, he has reached his late teens. In theory, he is ready to rule on his own. In practice, he is not his mother. Valentinian III will prove indecisive, easily influenced, and often overshadowed by his own generals. Especially Aetius, who becomes the last of the Romans in later legend for his role in stopping Attila the Hun at the Catalonian plains. Galla's influence doesn't vanish entirely. She remains in court, remains Augusta, and continues to wield soft power. But the era of her direct control is ending. She spends more time in religious patronage, in supporting churches, and building her own legacy as a pious empress. In Ravenna, a small but exquisite structure will later be associated with her. The so-called Mausoleum of Galla Placidia, a jewel of early Christian art, its ceiling glowing with dark blue mosaics, golden stars, and symbols of Christ. Whether she is actually buried there is debatable, but the building captures something of how she wanted to be seen, not as a schemer, not as a hostage, but as a Christian ruler, a bridge between imperial grandeur and spiritual authority. Yet, as she grows older, she must watch the world she fought to protect slip further and further away. In 439, Carthage finally falls to the Vandals. The loss is catastrophic. With Africa gone, Italy's grain supply becomes insecure. The Western states' finances crumble, armies go unpaid. Loyalty becomes harder to buy. The Goths she once lived among now rule as powerful kings in Gaul and Spain, increasingly independent, barely acknowledging Roman authority. The Franks are rising, the Huns are raiding. The Western Roman Empire is becoming less an empire, and more a fragile Italian kingdom with scattered contested provinces. Galla has seen this pattern before. Among the Goths, among shifting federate alliances, among courts that think they are eternal. She knows what happens to powers that cannot adapt. She has survived the sack of Rome, dynastic coups, exile, captivity, and the deaths of husbands and children. But she will not live to see the final fall of the Western Empire. Her story ends before that. In the year 450, Galla Placidia dies, probably in Rome. She is in her early 60s, a remarkable age for her time, especially given the upheaval she lived through. By then, the empire she labored to hold together is already half lost. Within a few years, Attila the Hun will ravage Gaul and Italy. A decade after that, her own son Valentinian III will be murdered, and in 476, the last Western Roman emperor, ironically also named Romulus, will be deposed by a barbarian general. Rome will fall, at least in the Western sense. When that happens, people will look back for answers. They will blame barbarian invasions, weak emperors, corrupt elites, economic decline, Christian pacifism, the loss of civic virtue, anything and everything. In those stories, Galla Placidia will be a footnote at best. But if we step closer, if we read between the lines of chronicle and law code and mosaic, a different picture emerges. For nearly 3 decades, through some of the worst crises the Western Roman Empire ever experienced, Galla Placidia was one of the central players keeping the system running. As a girl, she watched her father try to keep the empire united. As a hostage, she lived among its enemies and saw how Rome looked from the outside. As a queen among Goths, she represented the possibility of a hybrid future, a mixed imperial barbarian order that might have replaced the old one more gently. As an Empress and Regent, she navigated the treacherous currents of late Roman politics, balancing generals and bishops, barbarians and bureaucrats, Rome and Constantinople. She did not save the Western Empire, no one could have, but she slowed its fall, and her life, more than almost any other of her century, shows us what that fall actually looked like, not as a single dramatic collapse, but as a series of improvisations, compromises, personal tragedies, and fragile, fleeting victories. So, was she truly a queen of 3 kingdoms? Not in the fairy tale sense of wearing 3 crowns, but in a deeper, more historical sense, yes. She was queen consort among the Visigoths, a barbarian monarchy trying to find its place inside the Roman world. She was Augusta and regent in the Western Roman Empire, effectively ruling in her son's name. And she navigated the politics of the Eastern Roman Empire, the court at Constantinople that recognized her, empowered her, and used her as a tool against Western usurpers. 3 spheres of power, 3 overlapping realms, Gothic, Western Roman, Eastern Roman, all intersected in one woman's life. She was not supposed to lead, she was supposed to be exchanged, married off, sidelined. Instead, she learned, she adapted, she survived. And for a time, the fate of kingdoms turned on what she chose to do. In the end, the Western Roman Empire did fall. The Visigothic and Vandal kingdoms rose and fell. The Eastern Empire endured, transformed into what we now call Byzantium. But the world that came after, medieval Europe, with its mix of Roman law, Christian faith, and barbarian kingdoms, was shaped in the crucible that Galla Placidia lived through. The echoes of her decisions, whom she married, whom she trusted, when she fought, when she fled, rippled through the lives of millions who never knew her name. Today, in Ravenna, you can stand beneath a dark blue mosaic sky in a small brick building and look up at golden stars, at a cross, at doves and deer drinking from streams. They call it the Mausoleum of Galla Placidia. Maybe she was never buried there. Maybe the association came later, but it feels fitting. The child of a united empire, the captive of its conquerors, the regent of its last days, remembered not in a triumphal arch or a colossal statue, but in a quiet space of shimmering light, where Roman and Christian, old and new, blend into something different. Something in between, just like her life. If you enjoyed this story, if you want to hear more about the forgotten figures who stood at the hinges of history, consider subscribing to the channel. There are countless lives like Galla Placidia's, half erased from memory, but once powerful enough to move armies and redraw borders. And together, we can bring them back into the light.